play a game.
Oh. This rather large room here is the command center for NORAD. These screens you see in front of you connected to our satellites.
What is the primary goal?
To win the game.
Shall we play a game? These 5 words, spoken by an artificial intelligence called WOPR, set in motion one of the most thrilling and prescient science fiction films of the 1980s. Released in 1983 during the height of Cold War tensions, WarGames tapped into America's twin fascinations with emerging computer technology and nuclear annihilation anxiety. What began as a teenage hacker's innocent search for new video games nearly escalated into global thermonuclear war, a scenario that felt unnervingly plausible to audiences sitting in theaters just months after the real-world nuclear close call of the 1983 Soviet false alarm incident. With a modest $12 million budget, WarGames went on to gross nearly $80 million at the box office, cementing its place as a commercial success. But beyond its impressive financial performance, the film accomplished something far more significant. It introduced mainstream audiences to concepts like hacking, artificial intelligence, and computer security decades before these became everyday concerns. Director John Badham's techno-thriller didn't just entertain, it warned us about something we're still grappling with today: the dangers of removing human judgment from warfare and the potential consequences of creating technologies we don't fully understand or control. As Matthew Broderick's character David Lightman discovers, the line between simulation and reality can blur dangerously when we delegate our thinking to machines. What makes WarGames so fascinating isn't just its status as an entertaining relic of 80s cinema. It's how the film seems to grow more relevant with each passing year. As we venture further into an era of machine learning, autonomous weapon systems, and artificial general intelligence, the central question posed by WarGames becomes increasingly urgent. Can we trust machines with decisions that could determine the fate of humanity? Let's examine how this 1983 classic not only captured the technological zeitgeist of its era, but continues to serve as a warning for our own. You know what's crazy about WarGames? The computers. I mean, this film came out in 1983 when most people didn't have a personal computer, and those who did were using machines that could barely run Pong. Yet here's this movie showing us a teenager connecting to other computers across the country with his acoustic modem, an IMSI 8080 system. The filmmakers had to walk this delicate line between accuracy and accessibility, showing enough real tech to satisfy the early computer enthusiasts while keeping things simple enough for everyone else. The way they depicted those computer screens was revolutionary at the time. Instead of just showing static text, director John Badham made the decision to film actual CRT monitors with their green phosphor glow, giving them an eerie, almost living presence. The WOPR system's voice, provided by John Wood, who also played Dr. Falcon, feels genuinely unsettling as it calmly announces potential casualty figures in the millions. Behind the scenes, things weren't always running so smoothly, though. Did you know that Martin Brest, who later directed Beverly Hills Cop, was actually the original director? He was fired after just 1 week of shooting because the studio thought his take was too dark and serious. Badham stepped in and lightened things up, adding more humor and emphasizing the adventure elements. One of the most impressive technical achievements was the massive NORAD war room set they built. The real North American Aerospace Defense Command wouldn't let them film inside the actual facility, for obvious security reasons. So production designer Angelo Graham created this incredible 3-story set with giant tracking screens showing simulated missile trajectories. What's wild is that the real NORAD control room isn't nearly as dramatic. It's mostly just people at computer terminals in a fairly ordinary-looking room. But the film's version has become so iconic that many people think the real thing must look like that. I still get goosebumps watching those scenes where the WOPR runs through nuclear war scenarios. The tension builds so effectively as military personnel react to what they believe is a real Soviet attack, with those ominous red dots slowly crossing the digital maps. And it's not just visual. The sound design deserves major credit, too. The constant beeping of alerts, the clacking of keyboards, and that unforgettable mechanical voice announcing DEF CON 1 create this perfect storm of technological dread. What makes all this tech stuff work so well is that the filmmakers did their homework. They consulted with actual hackers and computer specialists to make sure the terminology and methods felt authentic. Sure, they took some creative liberties. Nobody was cracking NORAD's systems that easily, even back then, but the core ideas about password security, backdoor access, and system vulnerabilities were surprisingly sound. That's what elevates WarGames above typical Hollywood tech nonsense. It respects the viewer enough to get the details right, while still telling an exciting story that anyone can follow. And that's why tech professionals still reference it today, 4 decades later. Something that often gets overlooked is how brilliantly the film handles the concept of artificial intelligence. Remember, this was decades before machine learning became mainstream. The Whopper Joshua system isn't just portrayed as a calculator with attitude. It's shown learning through experience, developing preferences, and exhibiting curiosity. When Joshua keeps asking to play games, or when it becomes fixated on solving the nuclear war scenario, we're seeing an early cinematic portrayal of an AI with goals and drives that might not align with human welfare. The screenplay by Lawrence Lasker and Walter F. Parks deserves special recognition for making all this technical content digestible without dumbing it down. They managed to explain concepts like backdoor access and pattern recognition in ways that feel natural within the story. That scene where David explains wardling to Jennifer could have been boring exposition, but instead it's character development that shows his enthusiasm and her growing interest in both him and his technical knowledge. I also love how the film captures that early hacker ethos, the genuine joy of exploration and problem solving. There's this pure excitement when David first connects to the WOPR system that resonates with anyone who's ever figured out how to make technology do something new. It's not malicious, it's curiosity-driven. That portrayal helped define how mainstream culture would view computer enthusiasts for years to come, for better or worse. Let's talk about the heart and soul of WarGames. The performances that made us care about this whole computers might accidentally blow up the world scenario. At the center of it all is Matthew Broderick as David Lightman, and honestly, it's hard to imagine anyone else in the role. This was before Ferris Bueller made him a household name, and there's something so perfect about his mix of cockiness and vulnerability. Broderick brings this wide-eyed innocence to David that makes everything work. He's brilliant, but not arrogant. Just a kid who loves video games and wants to play the latest releases before anyone else. When he first realizes he's hacked into something way bigger than a game company, the look of pure fear on his face sells the gravity of the situation immediately. And that moment, when he finally understands that WOPR can't tell the difference between simulation and reality, Broderick delivers that dawning horror masterfully. Then there's Ali Sheedy as Jennifer Mack, and I have to say, the filmmakers deserve credit for not turning her into a typical 80s movie girlfriend. She's not just there to scream or look pretty. Jennifer is skeptical, practical, and often the voice of reason. There's this great scene where David is explaining how he changes grades in the school computer, and Sheedy perfectly captures Jennifer's mix of being impressed by his skills while questioning his ethics. Their chemistry feels genuine, like two smart outsiders who understand each other. But for my money, some of the most fascinating scenes involve John Wood as Doctor, Stephen Falcon, the brilliant but disillusioned creator of WOPR. Wood brings this weary gravitas to the role, a man who started with noble intentions but retreated from the world after personal tragedy and professional disillusionment. That scene on the island where he dismisses David's concerns about global destruction with "what's the point?" still hits me in the gut. His journey from nihilism back to responsibility grounds the film's bigger themes in something deeply human. I can't talk about memorable scenes without mentioning that nail-biting climax, where everyone's watching the WOPR rapidly cycle through launch codes while global annihilation hangs in the balance. The way the camera pans across the faces in that war room, military officers, technicians, politicians, all helplessly watching as a computer decides humanity's fate, is just masterfully done. No dialogue needed. Just pure visual storytelling. What makes the characters in WarGames so effective is how they each represent different responses to technology. David sees it as an exciting playground. General Beringer, played brilliantly by Barry Corbin, views it with suspicious pragmatism, and Dr. Falcon represents both technology's promise and its dangers. The film never makes any of these perspectives seem completely right or wrong. which is why its story continues to resonate even as our relationship with technology evolves. We also need to give a shout out to Dabney Coleman as Dr. McKittrick, who brings this perfect bureaucratic energy to the role. Coleman was absolutely everywhere in early 80s cinema, playing authority figures you love to hate. And here he embodies the military-industrial complex's blind faith in technology. The way he dismisses human judgment in favor of computer logic, I'd pity the poor bastard, sets up the film's central conflict perfectly. And let's not forget the smaller roles that make the world feel lived in and authentic. The technicians in the NORAD war room, David's parents who are completely oblivious to what their son is capable of, even the FBI agents who arrest him, they all contribute to this sense that we're watching real people caught up in extraordinary circumstances. It's this careful attention to character details at every level that elevates WarGames beyond a simple teen adventure into something with lasting dramatic impact. It's kind of fascinating how WarGames was initially received back in '83. Critics mostly treated it as this neat little teen adventure movie, exciting and well-made, but not particularly profound. Roger Ebert gave it 3 stars, calling it an amazingly entertaining thriller, but didn't really dig into the deeper implications. People were caught up in the surface-level excitement of this kid accidentally breaking into a military supercomputer. But here's where it gets interesting. As computers started becoming more common in homes throughout the late 80s and early 90s, WarGames took on this whole new significance. Computer enthusiasts began pointing to the film as the first time Hollywood got hacking somewhat right. The scenes of Broderick using social engineering to get passwords or searching through databases for backdoor access, these became reference points for actual security professionals. Not everyone was thrilled about this evolution, though. I remember reading how government and military officials were pretty concerned about the film glamorizing hacking. There were even rumors that certain security protocols at military installations were changed after WarGames came out. The movie accidentally created this blueprint that made hacking seem cool and accessible rather than criminal. The way people talk about WarGames has completely transformed over the decades. What was once that movie where the Ferris Bueller kid almost starts World War III is now regularly cited in serious discussions about AI ethics and autonomous weapons systems. Every time there's a news story about military AI or algorithmic decision-making, someone inevitably brings up the WOPR computer and its inability to distinguish between simulation and reality. One detail that always blows people's minds is that the filmmakers couldn't actually film inside the real NORAD facility in Cheyenne Mountain. They had to create their own version based on what little public information was available. Years later, military personnel revealed that the real command center was nowhere near as dramatic or high-tech looking as the movie version. Ironically, when NORAD renovated their actual facility in the 1990s, they apparently incorporated elements inspired by the movie set. Another fascinating tidbit: the giant WOPR computer prop, that imposing black box with all the blinking lights, later showed up in other movies and TV shows because it looked so impressively computer-like. It became this visual shorthand for powerful government supercomputer, even though real supercomputers never looked anything like it. What's really striking is how the film has shifted from being viewed as science fiction to something more like science warning. In 1983, the idea of an AI being given control over nuclear weapons seemed like a dramatic plot device. Today, with autonomous drones and AI-powered defense systems actually being deployed, those fictional scenarios don't seem so far-fetched anymore. WarGames hasn't just aged well. It's become more relevant with each passing year. The DNA of WarGames is everywhere once you start looking for it. Take Sneakers from 1992. That whole vibe of technological paranoia mixed with playfulness, pure WarGames energy. The 1995 cult classic Hackers might have amped up the visual style, but it was building on the foundation that WarGames laid down. Even something as recent as The Social Network owes a debt to how WarGames portrayed the thrill of digital exploration and its potential consequences. But the influence goes way beyond just movies. Talk to anyone who works in cybersecurity or AI ethics today, and so many of them will mention WarGames as one of those formative experiences that got them thinking about the bigger implications of technology. The film introduced concepts like backdoor vulnerabilities, password security, and social engineering to mainstream audiences decades before these became everyday concerns. What makes WarGames so eerily relevant today isn't just its portrayal of hacking, it's the fundamental questions it raises about AI decision-making. When the WarGames computer can't distinguish between simulation and reality, between games and actual nuclear war, it's highlighting exactly the kind of alignment problems that today's AI researchers worry about. We're building increasingly powerful systems that might not understand the real-world impact of their actions or might optimize for the wrong things. The film's warnings about removing humans from the loop in critical systems feels more urgent than ever. We're living in an era where algorithmic systems make decisions affecting millions of lives, from credit scores to predictive policing to content moderation. And just like in war games, these systems are only as good as their programming, their data, and their ability to recognize their own limitations. Even casual phrases from the movie have seeped into tech culture. When programmers talk about global thermonuclear war, they're often making a war games reference. The name Joshua still gets used in coding examples and Easter eggs in software. And that final line, "How about a nice game of chess?" has become shorthand for choosing a more constructive path when technology presents us with dangerous options. What strikes me most watching war games today is how optimistic it ultimately is. Despite all the tension and near catastrophe, it's a story about human judgment prevailing. The WarGames computer learns through experience that some games simply can't be won, that the only winning move in nuclear war is not to play. There's something profoundly hopeful in that message, suggesting that even our technological creations might eventually understand the value of restraint and coexistence. As we navigate our own increasingly complex relationship with AI, from chatbots to autonomous vehicles to predictive algorithms, the questions raised by this 42-year-old film feel more relevant than ever. Will our creations understand their limitations? Will they share our values? And most importantly, will we have the wisdom to know when to keep human judgment in the loop? If you found this deep dive into war games as fascinating as I did creating it, hit that subscribe button for more analysis of films that shaped our technological imagination. In the comments, I'd love to hear which movies you think predicted our digital future most accurately. After all, understanding yesterday's visions of tomorrow might help us navigate the very real challenges we're facing today. Just remember, sometimes the only winning move is not to play.